Mark, the Gospel of Mark, chapter 6. We're going to start in verse 30. And as God would have it, we're going to look at feeding of the 5,000. What is the purpose of what we did 2 weeks ago? What was the purpose when Jesus did it 2,000 years ago? All right? And if any of you are looking for a secretary and need one, I need to get rid of one. My birthday, I think, is at the end of this week. What will it be? 44, 45? Be 44. So my wife, so I'll be 44, I'll leave her alone. So my secretary thought it needed, she blew up my notes. They're really big. I got like two words on each page. You know what I mean? So I guess she thought at my age I needed larger words. Okay. We're going to look at the feeding of the 5,000. One of the things God has called us to do, and we're going to learn from this section, is to meet human needs. Now, when we talk about meeting human needs, there are generally two ways that churches mess that up. One is the church will only look at the spiritual needs of a person. Or two, they will only look at the physical needs of the person. What I want us to do today is I want us to look at what Jesus was teaching his disciples. Remember, they had just gone out. He had sent them out 2 by 2, and they were ministering in the power of the Holy Spirit. They were doing all great miracles. And then he brings them in. See, Jesus is preparing them. Now, Mark's gospel is shorter than the other 3 gospels, and so let me give you a timeline. We are getting very, very, very close to when it is time that he will go to the cross. Now, even though we've still got several chapters to go and Mark condenses everything, if you will read the parallel accounts, and we're going to today, we're going to look at this feeding of the 5,000 in Matthew and John, and we're going to bring it all together to see the heart of our Savior and what it meant, what he meant when he called us to meet human needs. And it's very important this morning that we understand that. The worst thing we can do is lose sight of the people that God's called us to reach. The worst thing we can do is lose sight of the heart of Jesus. Remember, he's training them. And he's using each instance and each situation to train them. Because he's leaving. And what I said the other week is true. You need to understand this. There is no ministry that goes on earth in this age that we don't do. And what? Well, that's the way God works. He doesn't use angels in this age. He uses us filled with the Spirit of God. God doesn't work any other way except through his church. Some people find that offensive. Read the book of Acts for a month. Come back, argue with me after you've read the book of Acts. Okay? And so that's what he was about to do. Was launch these men and women into the world to represent him. And so he's teaching them. He's showing them his heart. And the way that he does that is he shows them humanity's condition. You know what I know? Sometimes we would like everybody to be like us. What would be the point of ministry? You know, if everybody was put together and had everything together in as good a shape as we are, right? What would be the point of ministry? So when we look at human nature, I'm going to give you 2 viewpoints. The philosopher Schopenhauer said, life is a curse of endless cravings and endless unhappiness. There's a lot of people out there that believe that feel that are living that. But then Pascal said there is a God-shaped vacuum in the heart of every man, which only God can fill through Jesus Christ. Not Billy Graham, but Pascal said that first. Billy Graham used it, and I believe it's true. If our ministry isn't to people in need, what is our purpose for real? But we can't lose sight of that. Pascal had it right. There's a God-shaped vacuum. That addresses the physical desires and the spiritual need. And you can't separate the two, and when we do, we miss the boat. So let's look at this lesson in ministry. Let's read here in chapter 6, verse 30. Now the apostles returned to Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. And he said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a desolate place," literally a desert place, "and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a desolate place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. And when he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. And when it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the hour is now late. Send them away to go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered them, "You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "Shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat?" He said to them, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." When they had found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then he commanded them all to sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups by hundreds and by 50s. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing. And he broke the loaves, and he gave them the disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces of the fish. Those who ate the loaves were 5,000 men. Here's what I want to ask you this morning. The point of Jesus bringing the disciples out of their mission trip and bringing them back and having them look, now picture this in your mind. 5,000 men, and we know from the other accounts we're going to look at this morning, there were 15,000 to 20,000 by the time women and children were counted into those numbers. Jesus placed all of those needy people out in front of the disciples. And he looked at them and he said, "Go feed them." That is our responsibility. So if there's no weight of responsibility on your shoulders to reach the masses, why are you even here? This morning with a couple who will be joining next Sunday, was going through new members class and was going through our new vision and our new mission, and I thought, man, that's exactly what we're looking at today. But he was trying to teach the disciples what his passion, what his heart was, and how do we really do what God's called us to do? They were like us. They were busy with this, busy with that. They were looking at this, they were looking at that, and they missed the point. I've heard a lot of people preach on this passage, and they miss the point. All they want to do is talk about how he took the loaves and the fish and multiplied it, and God can do all those things. Listen, that is a point, and that is a truth, and it is real, and it is up to God to provide for the ministries. Like I said when I started, He's going to do it for you. But it's not the main point of this passage. Don't get so carried away in giving points and truths out of a passage you miss the main point of the passage. So he brings the disciples together. And he's teaching them his heart, his passion. And if you and I are going to be like him, then we've got not only to do what he did, we must love what he loved and whom he loved. Do you love those that aren't like you? Here Jesus is fleeing Herod. And he's giving, he knows he's drawing to the end, and he's trying to pass on what's in his heart. What's most important to him. And I want you to understand something. The miracles aren't the point of this story. The point of the story is, do you and I see people around us? Do we see and understand their great need? Do we really see it and understand it? Now, those of you that understand the Old Testament, you read the Old Testament, Jesus is a second Moses here. Moses was a little Jesus, if you will, a picture of Jesus coming. Moses led God's people out of bondage. And when he led them out of captivity and out of bondage, if you read the story there in Exodus, you read how he had to begin the 12 tribes, and he began to organize them. And as probably 2 to 3 million people left Egypt, and he organized them in the same way, in hundreds or 50s and hundreds and thousands, and he organized them by tribe, and he organized them. If you've read the Old Testament, you understand they had these very bright colors they made their clothes out of. And so when Moses stood looking from Mount Sinai at the people that God had chosen him to lead out of bondage into the Promised Land, it looked like if you and I were to fly over one of our states that grows agriculture, all these colors would look like an incredible garden. As Jesus stands there and these 20,000 people are organized in 50s and hundreds for this feeding, it was just like when Moses was leading them out of bondage. That was what Jesus was looking and seeing. You remember, what did God do? God sent manna from heaven. Who was standing and looking at these people in need, who were hungry? The bread of life. And I want you to think about that for a second. The Bible says there in verse 32, they were in a desolate place, literally a desert place. If you and I aren't intentionally placing ourselves in the way of people in desperate situations, in desperate need, we're really not doing ministry. Jesus looked at them, and they were in a desolate place. And it looked just like the children of Israel coming out of bondage. So the 12 had just come back from preaching. How effective were their results? Verse 33, look what it says there. It says that the towns and the cities, now many saw them coming and going and recognized them, and they ran before them because they had heard about the ministry that the disciples were doing. Notice, they'd heard about the miracles and all that the disciples had done, yet when Jesus says, hey, we need to feed these, who did the miracles? Not a trick question, not a trick preacher question. The disciples. The people heard it, and they fled out of the cities into the desert because they'd heard the 12 disciples were doing these miracles. Then Jesus looks at the disciples who had done the miracles and said, you need to feed all these people. And the disciples couldn't believe Jesus. They couldn't believe that he was going to multiply all of that. You see, Jesus was far greater than Moses and the manna that God sent, because he is the bread of life. And you and I need to think about something for a second. It's easy for you and I to forget Jesus' provisions of yesterday in light of today's needs. It's easy for us to forget. That's what they had just done. And I want you to think about something as we stand in the valley and we look at the mountain. You need to understand something. It takes the two mountains to form a valley. We prefer the tops of the mountains. But don't forget what Jesus has done for you in the past, is you have to look at the future. If you and I are going to do real ministry, we've got to do it the way Jesus wants us to do it. Not my philosophy, not your mama's philosophy, or her church's philosophy. But we need to understand his heart. Last 2 Sundays, and this will be the third, the thing I pointed out to you is the thing that most believers lack. That's Jesus' compassion. Jesus stood here and had incredible compassion for these people. You know, 9 times in the Old Testament, when the Messiah was predicted, 9 times the Bible described him in the Old Testament and said he would be a man of compassion. As we begin our story, Jesus says, guys, we got to go rest. We got to go and get away from these crowds. And as they went, the town's emptied and were drawn toward him. Not because of his spiritual status, but because of what he could do for them. What they would gain out of it. And yet as he looked at them in that condition, the Bible says he had incredible compassion for them. It breaks my heart sometimes to hear Christians argue things we shouldn't be even arguing. I can remember my first time going to Mexico on a mission trip, and as I saw the condition of the people there. See, that's the thing. You know, I know money is tight, but you really want to see this church change? We have seen God do some great change. You know, I was teaching through our core values this morning, and we decided 4 years ago that we're not going to be a country club where you pay your money and come to see if you get what you pay for. We decided we were going to be a people on mission. And the best thing that ever happens to a church is if you can get them outside the United States where they realize that this that we live in is a make-believe world. It's not how the other 9/10 of the world lives. My first trip to Mexico, I sat and watched in Mexico City as these children dug through trash. I watched as men and women at a barber shop as the children cleaned shoes. And I realized the thing we lack the most is compassion. If you don't believe that, you go to any normal Baptist church or Church of God or Presbyterian church or whatever kind of church you want to name it, and you start talking about actually reaching people that aren't like us, and you will see an incredible lack of compassion. We don't have compassion. Compassion. And I'm not talking about just for people in a foreign soul. If you can't have compassion in downtown Seneca, what kind of compassion will you have overseas? Most churches lack Jesus' compassion. You see, we don't get to do this thing the way we want to do it. Not the way I want to do it. That's what he was teaching the disciples. Have you read the New Testament? Have any of you really read the Gospels? Anybody? Until he died on the cross, all they did was argue about how they should do things. And then it would come, Jesus, hey, what do you think, man? You read the Gospels, right? It was just like any other Baptist committee meeting you've ever been to, right? And he was trying to get them to see that they were missing the most important things. Matthew 18:11, for the Son of God came to save that which was lost. If you don't have a passion to do that, I doubt you have a compassion for those around us. Literally, as you study this text, they came from 8 miles to this desolate place. How many of you have walked 8 miles lately for Jesus in the same day? They came 8 miles. And there they were. Jesus looked at them and he said, and they're like sheep without a shepherd. Over the years, the things that broke my heart most as a pastor is when we would try to reach this lost community. You see, most churches are set up to serve yourself. Right? That's why you fight over whether the music is the kind you like it or whether this is that or poor Janie. I always use Jim, John, and Janie, and I'm not talking about that, Janie. It's just the name I use. So, but you know, most people, that's what they do. They argue about not getting their needs met, and you miss the point as a believer if church is about getting your needs met. But I can remember the ministry, the things that breaks my heart the most is when we try to take our resources that would make us more comfortable and pour them into people that have entitlement attitudes and won't be grateful. and you know that going in, do you think this group is grateful? They were not, and I'll prove it to you in the Bible. You think Jesus didn't know that when he went into this? Sure he did. You think he didn't know that you weren't grateful when he died for you? If you think you were grateful, you sure don't understand the Bible. None of us were grateful. The thing that's broke my heart over the years, most of the ministry, is when we would begin to do those ministries. I can remember at a church that I won't be specific about because now I've got a lot of my former members watching these things on YouTube. But I can remember when we had the opportunity to really impact the community. And because we had just painted the walls in the church, they would not have it because they were afraid the children would dirty up the walls. Do you know what? You've heard me say God puts churches out of business. You better believe He does. Oh, yeah. If we don't have compassion for even the fickle, then we don't have His heart. Don't forget, He knows our heart. That's why I said He knew their heart. Jeremiah 17:9. Man's heart is deceitfully wicked. Who may know? Listen to what John 6:2 says, the account of this story. And a large crowd was following Him because they saw the signs that He was doing on the sick. They just came for what they would get out of it. They didn't come because they loved Jesus. The Bible's clear. And when we reach out to this community, they're not coming here because they love Jesus. They're not coming here because they're grateful for what you may have done for them or for their children. They're just doing what lost people do. They're getting theirs, seeking what's best for them. But do you have compassion? Number one thing in ministry. Why do we do what we do? Is it self-gratification? Or is it people edification? We decided 4 years ago it was going to be people edification. Most churches are set up for self-gratification. You need to ask yourself this morning, why are you here this morning? Is it self-gratification or people edification? That's what Jesus was doing with the disciples. He was trying to get them to understand and look at this thing and make this choice. And as He looked at the people, He knew that they were there because of self-gratification, and He was moved. So much so that the words used in the Greek were the same words when it talks about Lazarus. When He wept over Lazarus' death. Think about it for a second. This is what the Bible says in Jeremiah 13:17. But if you will not hear it, my soul will weep in secret for your pride. My eyes will weep bitterly and run down with tears because the Lord's flock has been taken captive. Lost people who we expect to act like us and do like us and dress like us and like what we like. Have you ever got to the point where you realize they're acting like they're acting because they've been taken captive? And Jesus didn't send anybody else, and He won't send anybody else but you to go rescue them. And you're going to stand in front of Him one day and look Him eyeball to eyeball and give an account for if you went on a mission to rescue Him or you didn't. They're captives. They're slaves to sin. Why do we minister? Who do we minister to? Here's my heart. This is what Jesus was trying to get them to understand. Who do we minister to? Anybody that'll let us. There should be no social scale or skin color test of who we minister to. Why did Jesus have such a compassion? Because He believed in hell. And I believe the number one problem that churches have today is we no longer believe in Him. We believe that the sinner's prayer at the end of service is some pixie dust that we sprinkle all over it, and just because your kin has sprinkled the pixie dust somewhere, they're not going to hell. Do you genuinely believe Jesus had compassion because He could see the destruction in which they were headed to? If they weren't, why would He have come and suffered like He did? If they couldn't be saved, why would He come? Why would He sacrifice what He sacrificed? Why such compassion? It was hell. It wasn't physical healing. Why? Did He do that? He did. He addressed the physical needs they had in order to fill the spiritual hole. But everyone He physically healed would soon die again. Would soon have a physical need again. It was the spiritual. Secondly, notice Jesus' concern. It wasn't skin deep. It moved into action. Jesus planned here. He had this plan for an opportunity for them to see who He was, and why He was there, that God might get the glory. You know what else we learn? We learn that He's looking there, and Moses organized them. And so, you see, why is it important that Moses organized the people coming out of bondage? You remember they had the Passover. What was the last miracle God did? They did the Passover. They put the blood over the door. The death angel passed over all that had the lamb's blood. Right? Right now, that's the reason that God sent manna. Right now, He's about to tell them that He's the bread of life. And do you know what week it was? It was the Passover week. The feeding of the 5,000 happened on Passover week. Here was the Lamb standing looking at 20,000 people that were in bondage, that were captives. John tells us He's about to tell them He's the manna from God. He's the manna from heaven. And it was Passover week for all these lost religious people. That's what John 6 tells us. He was about to explain to them that He was the bread of life. He was the second Moses sent to bring and lead them to freedom. To bring salvation to them. Think about that for a second. Matthew 4:4 says, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God." Now here's where you and I come in. Verse 37, here is an unsolvable problem. What is verse 37? It says, man, they're hungry, and the disciples, what do? The guys that's been out performing miracles, they look and they say, we can't feed them. We need to send them away, Jesus. Jesus says in verse 37, you feed them. It's an imperative. You know what an imperative is? How many of you remember when your mama said, get in here? Was that up for debate? Anybody? That's what an imperative is. Jesus looked at him. He said, you feed them. Grace, look at me right here. He's not asking us. He's telling us. He said, you feed them. Remember, it's an unsolvable problem. It's unsolvable. So what do? These great men of faith. That's right. That's right. They begin to dig through their pockets. They're like, we're going to come up with that kind of money. That's it. Ever been on the Baptist committee for that? Right? You're like, but where are we going to come up with that kind of money, Jesus? See, in the Greek, their tone was disrespectful to Jesus. Sure, let's let the lame walk, but how are we going to come up with that kind of money? Have you ever served on, not necessarily our finance committee? I was so hard. I mean, you have no idea. God confirms every month how much He has called our hearts together here. When we said feeding of the 5,000, you don't have to be a math whiz to look at our budget and know that we're behind on the budget. And when we came to that idea of feeding of 5,000, almost every committee that I know would have said we cannot afford it. The biggest numbers people we have, said we can't afford not to. That's a good thing. But look at verse 38. Notice what goes on here. So they're disrespectful to Jesus. And He said to them, how many loaves do you have? Go and see. And when they found out, they said, we got 5 loaves and 2 fish. You know what the answer was? If you've ever been to Israel, you understand what loaves were. They were not the big, hot, buttery things we think about. They're saltine crackers. Their loaves are about that, like that, and it's saltine crackers. Their fish wasn't the trout that you dream of when you order down the restaurant down here. They're sardines. And so John tells us that they went out and found a boy that had 5 saltines and 5 saltine crackers and 2 sardines. Literally, that's what they had. And they're looking. Jesus said, all right. He told them to feed them. And they're like, we can't. He said, well, go find what you've got and come back. So they come back with 5 saltine crackers, 2 sardines. It's an insolvable problem. Impossible mission. 15,000 people at least. And the disciples were asking the question, how are we going to feed them? When we said we wanted to be a church that we expect our members to have a strategy to go out of this community, to meet their needs so that we can introduce them to Jesus. What will be, that's what He's called us to do. What's going to be our response? Good news is, there's no problem God can't solve. Amen? But I love the they. There in verse 37, the they, that's Philip. Philip immediately whipped out his calculator, okay? He's like, 5,000 men, children, he's doing the numbers. He said, you know what, Jesus? It would take one man's salary. That's impossible. To feed these 20,000 people, it would take one man's yearly salary to do that. You know what's interesting? Philip, like most good Baptists, didn't do anything an atheist couldn't have done. I looked it up in Oconee. About 2014, the median middle salary here was $31,000. 2018, the middle median average salary a year is about $35,236. He said, Jesus, we don't have $32,000 in the bank. What are we going to do? See, the problem with Philip's calculations was he left God totally out of the equation. That was the problem. And he was like most good Baptist committees. Glad Outwards isn't like that. But he was like most Baptist committees. You know, there's usually 3 groups on a Baptist committee. And today, I am not talking about grace. By the grace of God, this is not us. But most Baptists, most churches' committees are made up of 3 people. One is the I feel part of the committee. They're emotion driven. The second person on the committee is the figures. They figure out whether you can afford to be obedient to God or not. And the third person on most committees is the fakers. They just simply find out what God wants, and they just follow Him. You put all 3 together, and it's usually an interesting hour or so, right? And so Philip was like, we can't do this. But you see, apart from God, Jesus' request was crazy. That's the point of the story. They were not. They were not independent of God and the thing that they'd called to do. See, the only thing that we can ask this community to do is to believe us about the unexplainable things that God and only God can do. That's the only thing that they're going to care about. See, apart from, I don't know, apart from that, why do we even do ministry? There was absolutely nothing, if you will, in Philip's mind that was any more spiritual or supernatural or lack of faith. The reality is, disciples at this point, they were more atheists than they were believers. At least agnostics believe there's a possibility God will come through, right? Corrie ten Boom said this: "There's no panic in heaven, there's only plans." The real reason that I want us to look at this story and see the point of it here, the real object here was not their meeting the physical needs of these people, but the spiritual. That's the real point of our feeding of the 5,000. Yes, we wanted to meet their physical needs. We wanted to meet their physical needs because you cannot separate the physical from the spiritual in people. Not in you, not in them, not in anyone. But if you only meet the physical needs, you damn the spiritual. If you only meet the physical needs, you damn the spiritual. Our object is never to be a social gospel. Do you know what a social gospel is? I never want to be a part of sacrificing for a social gospel only. See, Jesus didn't come to earth just to meet their physical needs, like the manna of the Old Testament. But He came to meet their physical and their spiritual needs. Listen to Psalms 103. "For as the heavens are high above the earth, so great is His mercy toward those who fear Him. As far as the east is from the west, so far has He removed our transgressions from us. As a father pities his children, so the Lord pities those who fear Him. For He knows our frame. He remembers that we're dust. And as for man, his days are like grass. As a flower of the field, so he flourishes. For the wind passes over it, and it is gone. And its place remembers it no more. But the mercies of the Lord is from everlasting to everlasting on those who fear Him." I know I've heard a lot of Christians. We know, preacher, if I'd been there, it'd been different. I love it when I teach on the Old Testament. They always ask, how could the Hebrews be? How could they be so wicked? How could they not believe God? You know, it's always easier to transfer what we think we do and look like and feel, rather than look in the mirror and see what we really are and what we really do. No, we wouldn't have done any differently. No. We're going to come up with a year's salary. You know what's interesting is those 20,000 people were dying of thirst, starvation, yet they were looking at the Niagara Falls. They were looking at the one who could meet every single need that they had. I want you to note what he says there in verse 41. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and he said, a blessing to sit before the people. Note by the word, by His blessing He provided. Jesus multiplied these loaves and these fishes. Jesus did this. Here's what I'm saying. The greatest thing we have to take them is the Word, is truth. The Word, truth. Our boxes of food will not make one little iota scratch or dent in their lives. But the Word, the gospel, the truth. If Jesus by His Word can feed 20,000, the point of that is that He, by His Word, can change and transform a life no matter who it is. Do you believe that this morning? Look up here for a second. It's one thing to preach and you amen and talk about skin color and socioeconomic status. It doesn't matter, and they don't have to look like us, dress like us, or like what we like. It's another to start going to them with the truth. So often the thing that breaks my heart in ministry is people will say, yeah, but preacher, they're, what are we going to do? Drug addicts, what are we going to do? Alcoholics, preacher, what are we going to do? Do you believe the truth? Do you believe He can change you? Second Corinthians 5:17, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. All things have passed away. Behold, all things have become new. Do you believe that no one is beyond God's changing and saving? Do you? See, nothing is impossible with God. But here's the thing you need to understand. None of our programs will change a life. None of them. Nothing we have can change a life. It can't even iron out moral flaws. But He can. All that our programs do is give us access to their physical needs in order to meet their spiritual needs. Listen to what the Bible said in John 6. When they found Him on the other side of the sea, they said to Him, Rabbi, when did you come here? Remember, Mark told us they knew where it was going. They beat Him there. Then they were sudden. When did you come here? Jesus answered them, truly, truly, I say to you, you're not seeking me, not because you saw signs, but because you ate your fill of the loaves. Do not work for the food that perishes, but for the food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give to you. For on Him God the Father has set His seal. Jesus' number one priority and concern was their spiritual. That ought to be our number one priority and concern. Though we do use the physical in order to get to that. Sometimes all we want church to do and be is a good time. And that's great, but not at the cost of the spiritual. If not, there's no real concern. A lot of times, we do what we do at the cost of the spiritual. You see, our mission is impacting Oconee County, filling them with the bread of heaven, manna from heaven. And sometimes we have to meet their physical needs in order to get to the spiritual part. People ask all the time, well, why? Why do we have to go out and do this? Or why do we have to have why do we have to have buildings? And why do we have to do that? There were about 200 people that gathered in this building, and I was able to give them the gospel at one time. That's right. Anybody know a better venue? All these things we do have to minister to the physical. Why do we have all these programs? In order to draw them in. So that we might have access to them. And after all of this, listen to what he said in 6:52. For they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. Sometimes we allow hearts to be hardened and we miss the point. The point of all that we do is to minister to our spiritual needs and their spiritual needs. You know what I wanted to do this Sunday? You know what I wanted to do? I told you I am getting a little, age is I guess it's a relative thing. It depends on what group you're sitting with, right? You sit with the 70s, the 65s, the 90s, and you know, I'm still a young whippersnapper. I sit with the 20-year-olds, the 30-year-olds, and I'm old. You sit with the teenagers, and I'm dirt, you know? I mean, but here's the thing I wanted to do this morning. I wanted to go across here and interview some of you this morning. I will not. I'll do Keith. I can give away to Keith. How old are you, Keith? 60. 60. Who over here is over 70? Over here. Who over here is over 80? Look up here for a second. When you first started out in your life, I wanted to interview some of you this morning. But about 12, y'all get antsy, and you know. 20 years ago, the things that were most important to you 20 years ago, what you drove, what you wore, where you lived, are they really as important to you today, 20 years later? Are they? The things that were most important to you 20 years ago, are they as important to you today? See, the closer you get, look up here for a second, the closer you get to the end, the more prioritizing what's really important you do. You understand what I'm saying? Sometimes we have to prioritize, and we need to prioritize spiritual things first. Things that we once thought were so important. We have to look at them through Jesus' eyes. Do you understand? That's what he was trying to get the disciples to do. You see, that's what I'm trying to get you to do this morning. As he looked out over those 20,000 people, their spiritual condition was the most important thing. You and I must prioritize what we do. But we have to do it by his priorities. This is what he said in John 6:26. Jesus answered them, "Truly, truly, I say to you what? You're seeking me not because you saw signs, but because you ate your fill of the loaves." He knew that. He understood that. But those things, the means that we use, the food we gave out, I know it costs real money. I know. I gave real money. Just like I told you, I've never missed one red penny I ever gave to Jesus. Never. But it took real money, real sacrifice from you to reach them. These buildings. How else would you gather this many people in one place and minister to them? You've got a better... I'm game. But see, it's not just about buildings, budgets, and yada yadas. It's about souls. I told you I'm not into the social gospel, and neither was Jesus. What is the social gospel? One of the things that I saw, there was a great division for me in the ministries that go on in Oconee County. I saw clearly during this process those that are in the social gospel. All that they care about is soup and soap, soup and soap, soup and soap, soup and soap. But I also saw those that care about soup and souls rise to the top. And they gathered around us. They sacrificed. They sacrificed their real money and time. And they won't even get a note from our financial secretary at the end of the year for all their sacrifice because they were interested in soup and souls. There you go. That's what's important. You say, well, wait a minute, preacher. Look, church, I can't tell you, man, I've been in some of the best churches in America and done the feeding of the 5,000. I've never seen that amount of people get up and say they were interested in the gospel. And you say, well, wait a minute, where are they at? I told you, change our thinking. I wasn't indoctrinated as a small child in the church. And when I got saved, I was spiritually dumb as a doorknob. You heard that phrase before? I didn't know I was supposed to go and be baptized. I didn't know. I didn't even know what I didn't know. Will there be some that absolutely oppose us? They're only here for what we give? Sure. I've had all kinds of church members like that too. Yeah. Not saying y'all. Okay? Sharp as a tack. John 6:32. Jesus said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, it was not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. They said to him, Sir, give us bread always. Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall never thirst. You see, we have to appeal to their physical needs in order to reach their spiritual situation. Do you remember the woman at the well? She came because she was thirsty, and there sat Jesus, and he said, I'll give you water that you never thirsty again. And she said, tell me where this water is. There'll be some that will not accept, but Jesus is really the only thing that will satisfy your soul this morning. Somebody said in John 6:35, Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger. Whoever believes in me shall never thirst again. That's why Jesus said in Matthew 6:8, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Amen. Thirdly, as we finish this morning, Jesus' care. Do you care about the things that he cares about? Say, but preacher, I'm just a common person. How is God going to use me? There's nothing special about me. I want us to finish up this morning with this passage. 2 Corinthians 12. He said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. My strength is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, most gladly I would rather boast in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Therefore, I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in needs, in persecutions, in distress, for Christ's sake. When I am weak, then I am strong. God's only looking for some common people. Common people. 2 Corinthians 4:7. But we have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the excellence of the power may be of God, and not of us. God's only looking for just some regular clay pots. That's right. Yeah. As he pours his love into us for us to pour it out to them. That's all. I'm going to close with Elizabeth Elliot's statement. If the only thing you have to offer is a broken heart, you offer a broken heart. So that in a time of grief, the recognition that this is the material for sacrifice has been a very great strength for me. Realizing that nothing I have, nothing I am, will be refused on the part of Christ. What does that mean? God needs cashiers. God needs regular people. Matter of fact, God only uses humble, regular people. I've noticed that most of the time charismatic spiritual giants are more driven by the flesh than the spirit. Christ, I simply give it to him. As the little boy gave Jesus his 5 loaves and 2 fishes. With the same feeling of the disciples when they said, what is the good of that for such a crowd? Naturally, in almost anything I offer to Christ, my reaction would be, what is the good of that? The point is, The use He makes of it is His blessing. God doesn't need your strength. God doesn't need your money. God doesn't need your talent. He only requires all of it, all of you. See, this morning is this. As we look forward to see what God will do with grace in 2018 or 2019, what are you going to give? See, that vote was up to something. You're either all in or you're all out. Now, I put up here in the spring poker chips that we'd have to shoot several people, okay, bear them out back. Right? You understand? This morning, my challenge is to you for 2019. Are you all in? Because God's not interested in halfway. There are churches and preachers and deacons, and they like people that are somewhat committed. But God's only interested in you. You're either all in or not in at all. So this morning, my challenge is to you. I'm not asking you to be all in to me or all in to the Baptist. But with Him, you're all in and not at all. That's the challenge. Are you all in? See, even you Alabama fans can get behind that, right? Would you bow your heads this morning? Same is true when it comes to salvation. Religion, you can give what you desire, what you feel you can live without, what's an acceptable sacrifice. But when it comes to having a relationship with Jesus Christ, God requires all. You're all in or not at all? So let me ask you a question this morning. If you've never given your heart all to Jesus, totally, why don't you do it this morning? It doesn't matter who you are or what you've done or where you come from. That's right. He can and will change you.
Amen.
Doesn't matter your past. Doesn't matter your mistakes. Doesn't matter. He really can change you. Why don't you give your heart to Him this morning? Maybe you're saved and you've never been baptized. You may not have even known. First thing that He asks is for you to come and publicly state that you've given your heart to Him, just like you do if you've ever, in marriages. That's what the point of the ceremony is. You know, I know a lot of people say, you know, preacher, you don't have to go to church in order to love God, love Jesus. No, going to church doesn't save you, but if you are saved, yes, you do. Because how could you say that you don't love the bride, the body, the church? So the next thing you want to do is join to a body that will love you and care for you and disciple you and help you grow in your relationship with the Lord. This morning, as God leads, you come. You do as God calls you. Well, my challenge to us this morning is in 2019, where are you? All in for Jesus. Father God, into your hands we give this invitation, and I pray, Father, God, I pray for those that are here that you would open their eyes spiritually. Help them to discern, Lord, your heart. God, empty us of our desires, our wants, even our fears. God, fill us fresh and new with your Spirit as we surrender. I pray it in Christ's name. Amen. Let's stand this morning.
There is a truth older than the ages. There is a promise of things yet to come. There is one born for our salvation, Jesus. There is a light that overwhelms the darkness. There is a kingdom that forever reigns. There is freedom from the chains that bind us. Jesus.
remind you that next Saturday night and Sunday morning we're going to do our Christmas program. And what that is next Saturday, we're going to be having Santa here. It's going to be over there, free pictures of Santa. And then afterward, we plan it to come straight over here and do our retelling, our contemporary retelling of the Christmas story. Here's why that's important. I know you're thinking, well, I can just go Sunday. You need to think differently, right? Saturday night, when everybody brings their kids over, get all your friends, hey, free pictures. We print them out, give it to them, and then get them to come over here because we're sharing the gospel as we retell the Christmas story. This is your opportunity to give people that normally would not come to church. This is the month. This month is the #1 time that nearly 99.7% of America is open to come to church.
Amen.
And I guarantee you they'll hear the gospel. Take advantage of it. Come next Saturday and Sunday. God bless you. Have a great day.